Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and we have a new pope. He's from Chicago. Yes, America. We have a pope named Bob, and he's a White Sox fan. Cardinal Robert Prevost, the first American pope, will take the name Leo XIV. He was selected on the second day of voting for the conclave, where cardinals from around the world gather in the Vatican, in the Sistine Chapel, to elect a pope to lead the 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide. It's a scene fresh on the minds of many people around the world who, of course, watched last year's Academy Award-winning film Conclave, which portrays a fictionalized account of this process. In fact, Politico Europe reports many cardinals themselves watched the film in preparation for the actual proceedings. The real conclave started yesterday, and that vote ended without a consensus, signified, of course, by the black smoke billowing from the Vatican. But then this afternoon, we got a different sign.
As we watch this go, oh, white smoke, we have a pope. We have a pope. The cheers are coming up. Do we hear the bells ringing? One of the things that has happened is that because it was difficult to tell white smoke from black smoke, they instituted the ringing of the bells. But now, on day 2 of this conclave, the Catholic Church, 1.4 billion Catholics, we have a new pope.
The white smoke, the original push notification, the original breaking news banner that we have a new pope, Leo XIV of Chicago, Dalton, Illinois, in the South suburbs, to be precise. He's got kind of a fascinating history, the son of an educator and a librarian. He was raised on the South Side as part of the St. Mary of the Assumption Parish. Like Jalen Brunson and Bradley Cooper, he attended Villanova University near Philadelphia, where he studied mathematics. But despite being the first American pope, Leo remains something of an enigma to many within the American church. That's because he spent 2 decades in Peru. He was working in the country's poorest enclave, first as a missionary and then as archbishop. In fact, he loved his time in the country so much, he actually became a naturalized citizen of Peru. Leo was something of a disciple of the previous pope, Pope Francis, seen there together, who elevated him to cardinal back in 2023 before appointing him to lead the dicastery of bishops, which is a very influential position within the Vatican in Rome, in the church. Now, there's a kind of tendency that happens for those of us outside the Vatican to read everything in the church's politics through the prism of our own, which is somewhat understandable. That said, we should be really clear. The internal logic of a papal conclave, like why someone got chosen, is notoriously inscrutable. It's sort of meant to be. All that said, it certainly seems to be the case that Pope Leo shares a certain disposition with his predecessor, his beloved predecessor, with a particular appreciation for Francis's willingness to break with some traditions of the past.
Francis is not afraid to rock the boat a bit, to shake things up. And when he does that, there are people who are uncomfortable. We all have different personalities, and we all have kind of different ways of, wanting to keep the boat calm and please don't rock the boat. Please don't do that. And Francis is like, you'll be all right.
Pope Leo also seems to share a good deal of the kind of driving force behind what, to me, was Pope Francis's theological vision, a kind of embedded earthy universalism, solidarity with all people, but especially the most vulnerable among us, the folks at the margins, the migrants, the very poor, those incarcerated, those displaced by war, regardless of nationality, perhaps even regardless of faith. Now, Pope Leo rose through the church as a member of a particular order, as Pope Francis had through the Jesuits. This is the Order of St. Augustine, which promotes a strong sense of community as well as foundational belief in caring for the poor and vulnerable. To that end, a lot of folks picked up on a tweet that then Cardinal Prevost posted back in February, just of this year, that shared an op-ed that was sharply critical of the Vice President, J.D. Vance, a Catholic convert. Specifically, it took issue with Vance's attempt to use Catholic doctrine towards his own version of nationalism.
There's this old school, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country, and then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that. They seem to hate the citizens of their own country and care more about people outside their own borders. That is no way to run a society.
It was in response to those remarks that the man who is now known as Pope Leo shared this headline. He didn't write it, but, quote, J.D. Vance is wrong. Jesus doesn't ask us to rank our love for others. This, of course, is an interesting position for the church to be in. And I got to say, point of personal privilege here, someone raised Catholic. My father was actually a Jesuit seminarian from the Midwest who was in Peru at a period. I've got very complicated feelings of frustration and affection for the church. I'll be the first to admit in many ways it can be deeply flawed. It's often a reactionary institution. But for me, what was so striking about the stewardship of Pope Francis, which I really found inspiring, which is that while he didn't really change any of the core teachings of the church on matters that I personally don't agree with, sexuality and gender, reproductive choice, his public ministry, how he chose to delegate his attention, was centered on the parts of the Catholic tradition that are about care and care for the poor and for the marginalized. And also, Jesus is urging us not to judge people too harshly, right? That commitment was symbolized in his final acts. For instance, I don't know if people saw this little detail, but he had about, I think, 200,000 euro in his personal bank account, and he left that money to the incarcerated, to prisoners who he visited and ministered to often, even washing their feet often. Also, one of the things he asked is that the Pope mobile that he used be turned into a mobile clinic for those in Gaza. In fact, Francis's commitment to Gaza was so strong that he called his congregation there nearly every night. There's pictures of him talking to them on FaceTime as they sheltered in a church. And the reason that Francis really became a global icon for so many people across the world, including, frankly, many who were not Catholic, is because of the just obvious evident sincerity of that care and that vision of universalism. Speaking in his personal capacity, he once suggested he likes to believe hell is empty, for example, that all people on this earth can find redemption and see the light of heaven. And that view, very deliberately, was a global one. It was a rejection of nationalism and isolationism, a refusal to limit or tier our care only around the borders of a country. And in this respect, it does, as far as we can tell, appear Francis' successor shares that view, which finds him fundamentally at odds with the nationalism of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Of course, last week, our president half-jokingly floated himself to be the new pope, sharing this AI-generated image of himself as the head of the Catholic Church. And I have to say, like, it's a high bar for me to find something offensive on behalf of the church, but I found that offensive. Many people did, especially because people were still mourning the loss of the actual pope. Donald Trump's never going to be the pope, of course. But somewhat interestingly, he now has to contend with the fact that he may no longer even be the most famous American in the world. That title arguably now belongs to a man who spent much of his life abroad doing mission work with the poor, a Chicago man now known as Pope Leo. Joining him now, Miguel Diaz, who knows the new pope and served as U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, and Father William Daly, a lecturer in law at Notre Dame Law School and a fellow at the Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture. Ambassador Diaz, let me start with you because you know the new pope. Just first of all, your reaction to seeing the news. I mean, that is a heck of a thing to cross your notifications. Oh, like, I know that guy when someone is announced as the pope.
Absolutely. And over the last few days, I have been texting some of my friends because 4 professors, colleagues, deep friends here in Chicago, Loyola University of Chicago, we have been leading this initiative, bridge building initiative with Pope Francis and Dr. Emil Secura, who is basically one of the highest ranking women at the Vatican and the Secretary for the Pontifical Commission for Latin America. And I kept thinking, I think this is going to be the next pope. And all of a sudden, everybody thinks I had some insider's view into this. When I woke up, this morning, and it's okay, black smoke, and then I'm there speaking with some friends, and the white smoke rises in the news of Chicago, and this is just absolutely marvelous news for those of us that are from this city. But I want to say congratulations, you just nailed it. I mean, one of the things that this American cardinal is giving us is a new way of seeing, the United States. It's going from America first to America cares. I mean, the vision of the gospel, which is to care for our neighbors, to care for everyone, but as you said, especially for those who are marginalized, oppressed, the poor. those that suffer from violence, gun violence. This is at the forefront of this of Pope Leo. So, and of course, he took the name of Leo, and that's significant because that is at the Pope Leo, his the other Leo, the Pope Leo, his predecessor, the 13th, is associated with Rerum Novarum in the whole true Catholic social teaching, and so marvelous choice to be someone to, the name, there's something in that name, and it's clearly social justice and peace. Those were his first words. Peace be with you.
Father Daly, a good day, I think, for Midwestern Catholics. I think all Midwestern Catholics feeling a little sense of pride. What's your reaction to today's news?
Yes, but not for Cubs fans, Chris, which I know you are.
Yes, I know. I thought, but of course he's, of course, South Suburbs, of course, White Sox fan. And I got to say, his brother clarified that in a local news broadcast.
Yeah. I was a little bit shocked. One of my residents here in Graham Family Hall, where we have the Chapel of St. Augustine, so an Augustinian Pope, there's St. Augustine behind me, asked me last week, will we have an American Pope? And I said, the standard answer, which always made sense to me, is with American cultural hegemony in so many other ways, it's unlikely that a Pope, a cardinal, unless he was extraordinarily humble, would ever be chosen to add an extra American as a sort of big voice in the world. And so it's quite striking that they did. Now, he isn't the first American Pope. He's the first North American Pope.
Yes.
As you pointed out in your show, he's also a citizen of Peru. And so he's the second South American Pope. And, my law school mentor at Columbia, who's now at NYU, Jeremy Waldron, a Christian but not a Catholic, often spoke about cosmopolitanism in the law. And he would always begin by saying the Catholic Church is the most cosmopolitan institution in the world. And Bob Prevost, as you rightly called him, represents that, right? He has certainly deep roots in Chicago. I'm getting pictures from former students of mine who were with him at their high school, St. Rita's. The donor of my dorm is a St. Rita's graduate, a great Notre Dame story. So he's thoroughly American in that sense, North American, but also devoted, as your excellent introduction said, to the people of Peru. So it is an exciting day. And, I also received a number of texts. I received texts from atheists, from secular Jews, from ex-Catholics, from Protestants, everyone wishing the church well. It's a remarkable day.
Yeah.
How people pay attention, despite all of the failings of the church and some of the understandable cynicism. People want the Pope to be a figure that they can rally around, even if they're not Catholic or particularly religious. But I did receive a number saying, is this about Trump? As you say, that's a very American-centric view. I don't think it's really about. But besides the Leo XIII parallel, it did occur to me that your own viewers might be interested to know that the first Pope Leo in 452 was known to have met with Attila the Hun and turned him away from invading Italy. So there may be more than one parallel to what this Pope brings, having chosen the name Leo, which was a very bold choice.
That point, Father, I thought exactly how I was feeling. It was striking to me, Miguel, that the level of interest. I mean, this is one of the oldest institutions in the world. There's many Catholics in the world, but there are many more who aren't. American sort of pop culture doesn't particularly, not particularly Catholic, and yet there was really this sense of total world attention, and a kind of like whoa moment of captivated attention when this announcement was made, precisely because, as Father Bill said, I think it was so surprising, and that the idea of a Pope Bob so sort of oddly delightful.
Right. But I also think that we are thirsting for, we're thirsting for a peace builder. We're thirsting for a healer. We're thirsting for someone to continue the work that Pope Francis has been doing. I mean, we are so polarized. And, Pope Francis spoke about the globalization of human indifference. And, I think we got it. I think we clearly agree that people want, we want us to hit that heart. We want us to be compassionate. We want us to be caring people. And I think that this is a great symbol, because we are a superpower. But this kind of is a superpower of service, right? And so I just think it's wonderful. He goes out there and speaks Spanish. He speaks Italian, but then he traces back its roots to Latin America. So it was like, oh my goodness, this is just, I was in tears. I literally started crying because it was so overwhelming.